Hello everybody, I'm back and today I'm gonna fill these and talk about books. So if you're new here, welcome to the Nail Coven. Sometimes I talk about stuff while I do my nails. And today is one of those days. I need to fill these. And I want to share the latest book I've read. It's one of my favorite books of all time, ever since I was junior high, and it was required reading. And that is The White Mountains by John Christopher. This book had a big impact on me, and I've probably read it at least 10 times in my life. At least. I just wanted to share it because I read it again. So let's get started. I was thinking about the book one day and I was like, yeah, I want to read that again. So I went online to order it from Amazon and I realized I'd never known, as many times as I had read it, it was actually just one book in a series. It was the first book. So I ordered the whole series. It's a trilogy. Then they came out with a prequel. I'm so excited for that. So let's get into the story. Again, this is a young adult novel. We meet Will Parker. He's 13 years old. And when we first meet him, he's the one that narrates the story. He's in his father's study. And he's talking about the fact that there's only a few clocks in his village, that there's only a few that keep, good time. But something very rare that his father keeps in a locked drawer in his study is a watch. And how unimaginable the technology is. He's in there admiring it. He's not supposed to be. His father has left to go to work or something like that, and he's in there without anyone knowing. I don't know where his mom is. He slips it on his wrist and he's thinking, wow, this thing is so cool. But you know what would be cooler is if someone saw you wearing this cool thing. Now, he has plans to meet up with his cousin Jack, who's a little bit older than him. So he is going to go meet up with his cousin and show him this amazing contraption. So on Will's way to meet up with Jack, he hears someone call his name as he's like strutting down the road. He's got the watch, but he doesn't want anyone to know that he has it. So he's got his arm in his pocket, the one with the watch on, kind of shoved in his pocket. So no one will actually see it. And as he's walking along, all of a sudden, he hears someone calling his name. And it's his other cousin, Henry. Now this cousin, he doesn't like so much. He's a year younger than him, but he's bigger than him. And these two do not get along. They fight, like they get into physical fights a lot. But even though Will is a little older, Henry still gets the best of him a lot because he's just bigger. Will's a little bit small for his size, for his age. Will hears Henry call after him, but he tries to ignore him and just keeps on down the road. But Henry catches up to him, pushes him down to the ground. And instinctively, Will pulls out his arm that has the watch in it that was shoved into his pocket. He pulls it out to catch himself. Henry's like, oh, what's this? He knows it's something he's not supposed to have. And he takes it from Will and he's like, oh, let me see. Oh, this is cool. I think this is probably your father's. I don't think you're supposed to have this. And Will's like, give it back. You're gonna break it. And, like any kid that took something from the house he wasn't supposed to, he'd be very concerned about its condition. So he's like, give it back, give it back. And Henry is like kind of, because he's bigger than him, he's just like holding it over his head, you know, kind of like keep away type of thing. And, you know, not giving it back. So then, luckily, Jack shows up. Now Jack, being older than both of them, is also a little bit bigger than both of them. Jack is able to get the watch back from Henry and give it back to Will. He tells Henry to take a hike, and he does because he's the older cousin and he has to do what he says. Not formally, but you know, it's just family hierarchy stuff. So Jack tells Will, he's like, I don't think you should have brought that out. That your dad's gonna be pissed about that. He's like, you should probably take it back. Then we'll head out to where we were going. So they do. And then they go to a little, what they call their den. It is a little, kind of like a fort that kids would make. And theirs is a little different because it's made out of like a little area that's in a bunch of ruins. Okay, they call them the ruins. It's a little place nobody knows about. It's just their little secret hideaway place where they do boy stuff. They hunted a rabbit and they're like eating this rabbit. So in their den, Will is talking about how, or not talking, thinking to himself as they're like building a little campfire and roasting this rabbit, how he's sad because in about a week's time, Jack is to be capped. And after he's capped, they won't be able to be friends anymore because he'll be a man now and Will is still considered a boy. They're kind of sitting there in silence for a little bit. And then Jack tells Will that, you know, once he's capped, the fort will be his now and to take good care of it. And this kind of surprised Will because even though everybody gets capped at a certain age, I think it's 14, nobody really talks about it. There's all this stuff that you can't talk about in regards to the capping. Jack says that he's kind of low-key hoping that the capping doesn't take, that he would rather be a vagrant. A vagrant in this world is a person whose capping did not work correctly. For whatever reason, it doesn't take, and it leaves them kind of a little nuts. They kind of wander around the countryside, kind of living on people's charities. Everyone kind of understands that, you know, they're the way they are to no fault of their own. And in each village or town or city, they have vagrant houses where people of the village will donate things, clothes, food, and the vagrants will just live off of that. And they kind of just roam from town to town. They never stay in one town for very long. They always travel solo, and they just kind of are very odd people. You're not really kind of supposed to talk to them. Just kind of let them do their thing. Will describes a few that had come through their town as doing odd things like stacking rocks in weird configurations with no real rhyme or reason to what they were doing. Most of them were very quiet, wouldn't say much, and when they did, it just didn't make much sense. Then Jack starts to kind of talk out loud about the ancients, people that they call the ancients. What life was like before the tripods in what they call the Black Ages. And again, people are not really supposed to talk about this. They wonder what the people were like. They wondered how they came up with so many interesting inventions and technology, because their technology was far more advanced than theirs. Talked about their great ruins, the great cities they made, and just how impressive things were, how impressed they were by these ancient people who seem to have a lot of knowledge. And they're discussing these things and they're wondering, why people aren't still like that. And Will says, well, that's true. Wonder why they're not. But people nowadays they're happy, so does it matter really? As long as everyone's happy. And Jack's like, yeah, you're right. So a few days later, it's capping day for Jack and the other children his age in the village. So it's kind of like a holiday. It's a holy day. There's, parties, a feast. But you start the day at church. The pastor gives sermons on manhood and womanhood and what that means. So on this holy day, you start out at church, and those that are going to be capped are all wearing white tunics. After the sermons, everyone goes out in front of the church and they all wait, the ones that are going to be capped and everyone else. Then a bell starts to ring and they all kind of just sit there and wait to see what's going to happen. They feel thumping and a vibration in the ground. And they all know what that means. That means the tripods are coming to cap those that are of age now. And Will is watching all of this happen with his friend, and he's starting to get a little nervous because next year it's going to be in his friend's spot. It's going to be his turn to be capped. He's a little nervous about what that's going to mean for him and his life going forward. So the tripod comes. Will describes it as 3 times taller than their church. So I'm imagining this thing is between like 3 and 5 stories. It has a large hemisphere on top and it's metal and 3 metal legs coming down. So this metal monster, band name, comes up to where all the people are gathered and a tentacle comes down from the hemisphere and wraps around Jack's waist and then takes him up into the hemisphere of this machine. A door or like a little opening opens and the tentacle with Jack being held by it goes up into this doorway and it closes behind him. The tripod leaves and the rest of the village has a celebration and they're having a good old time in honor of Jack and all the other children that went away with the tripod, because they're going to officially be adults and they will have been capped. So in the afternoon, the tripod comes back and has all the children, returns them all capped. It's a big deal. They have huge feast in their honor. All of the children who are now officially adults have shaved heads and a metal wire, like spider webbed cap. So it's all this metal, it's like spider web together, goes on their head. And it's very, everyone's super happy about it. The ones that are capped are happy. The ones that have their children are now capped are now adults, and everyone is stoked. So the next time that Will sees Jack is a few days later, and he sees him coming home from the fields with a bunch of the other men. And he goes up to Will or Jack. Jack kind of is a little different, a little more chill. He tells the guys to go ahead and he'll catch up with them later. Will asks Jack, so how is it? Like, how do you feel? And he's like, oh, I feel fine. He's like, oh, okay. He's like, how was it? What was it like up there? Jack says, we're not permitted to tell you. We're not supposed to talk about it. He's like, oh, okay, yeah. Will brings up what they had talked about the other day about, the ancients and all that stuff. And he's like, oh, that was just nonsense. He's like, All I can tell you is don't worry about it. It won't hurt. Nothing, it's not bad. Like, you'll be fine. He's like, never mind what we talked about the other day. It was nonsense. And he turns around and walks off. So Will kind of becomes a little depressed because he's lost his friend. And he's also having some anxiety over his own camping next year. He's not so sure he's okay with it. And because of this, he's becoming a little more curious about the vagrants and just like who they are as people. He's starting to like just pay a little bit more attention to them when they're coming, through his village. One day, he's walking along and he meets a vagrant. They get to talking. And his name is Ozymandias. He speaks very oddly, almost poetically, but you can understand him at least. They're just chatting and, Ozymandias is asking him if he has any friends, like, what do you do? And Will is like, yeah, not much. And no, I don't have any friends, not anymore. Not since my friend was capped. And Ozymandias is like, oh, yeah. He's like, that's a shame in his, odd way of speaking. That's what he says. So, yeah, every once in a while, Will runs into him and they have a little chat, a little discussion. But it's kind of being noticed in the village and people are starting to gossip about Will and his association with vagrants beyond just, the everyday stuff you're supposed to do, like give them charity and stuff. It gets back to his father, and his father is not happy about it, and he tells him to stop hanging out with vagrants and that he will not hear any more about it. And Will's like, okay, sorry, Dad, you're right. And he thinks to himself, yeah, I need to get my act together and stop acting like a child and just like accept things and do what I'm supposed to do and not worry about it. But he just can't shake it. He can't shake this feeling that he doesn't want to be capped, and he can't shake the conversations he's been having with Ozymandias. So as much as he had been trying to be good and really was trying to avoid seeing him, one day on his way home from school, he decides to walk past the vagrant house, kind of half hoping that he's going to run into Ozymandias again. And he does. And they have a little conversation again that kind of fascinates Will and just makes Will more curious about who this guy is and what he's all about. What does he do all day, And as they're talking again, he starts to worry that maybe someone is going to see them and it's going to get back to his father. So he tells Ozymandias about his den that he has out in the ruins, way, way past the village that nobody knows about. Ozymandias is like, oh, that sounds cool. He's like, do you go there often? And Will says, usually, after school. Yeah, I usually go there. And Ozymandias is like, well, that would be cool. Maybe one day we'll run into each other. Not suspicious at all. The next day, Will decides to go to the den and maybe run in to Ozymandias again. He goes there and he doesn't see him. He's like, okay, well, maybe he was just a crazy guy and, I shouldn't really be talking to him anyway, so. But then he hears a voice. It's Ozymandias. And he's like, hey, Will. And then suddenly Will's in his mind, he's like, oh, crap. Maybe I shouldn't have done this. I know my parents are probably telling me not to talk to vagrants for a good reason. He's like, there's even been stories of, vagrants who have killed children, and he's just like, oh crap, what have I done? And he starts to get scared. And Ozymandias, he was kind of hiding behind something, and he comes out, he's like, hi, Will. And so they're kind of talking small talk at first. Will's like, well, thinking to himself, maybe he's not, dangerous, he's just weird. He notices that Ozymandias isn't really talking like how he used to, in like weird, archaic or poetic verse like he was out in the village when people would see them. And they're talking, and Ozymandias asks him about his friend, and, you know, then capping and tripods come up, and Ozymandias says, do you have any questions about the tripods? And Will's like, well, yeah, I have a lot, but nobody will answer my questions because we're not supposed to talk about it, so why even bring it up? And Ozymandias says, well, I'll answer them for you. And this is when it dawns on Will that Ozymandias is not a vagrant. You're not a vagrant, are you? And he's like, no, I'm not. And he's like, but you're capped. And he says, yes, but by freemen. He's like, if you have questions about the tripods, he's like, I'll answer them for you. So Will's like, yeah, where are they even from? Ozzy tells him that there are two theories on this. One theory is that they were actually machines built by people, the ancients, and that, you know, their technology kind of got away from them, kind of like an AI situation or a singularity where humans make technology so advanced it takes over the world, like Terminator style. So the other theory is that they're not from this world. They came from a different world, and that they made things better for people. While the ancients had created amazing technology and built up a great civilization, there was war and fighting and disease and all these terrible things that the people just couldn't handle. So the tripods came from another world and fixed everything. Now he tells Will that they're not really sure if the tripods themselves are these creatures that came from another world, or if they're a type of vehicle, and that life forms are actually traveling inside these tripods, or are the tripods the creatures themselves. He also explains the caps and how they're not sure if they just make people docile or if there is actual mind control going on. They know that they can give direct orders to certain people, and that also that once they're on, they kind of start to grow into the flesh. That way they can't be removed. He tells Will about the snowy mountains and that he and others live there and that there's no tripods there. They think because of the mountainous terrain, the tripods can't maneuver there. He tells Will that the reason he pretends to be a vagrant is so that he can recruit young people for the White Mountains as a way to save them from being capped. They're looking for people that are old enough to ask questions, but obviously not so old that they've been capped already. Will expresses interest in going to the White Mountains, and Ozymandias tells him, that's wonderful, but just know, like, this is a really tough journey, and you'll have to go by yourself. You can't get caught, or people will find you and return you in order to be capped. He also gives him a map, a compass, and some verbal directions on how to get to the White Mountains. Will asks Ozymandias, you know, why don't the tripods just destroy people? Like, why deal with us at all? Like, if they want to live here from somewhere else, why didn't they just kill us all? Obviously they can. And Ozymandias tells him that they think it's because the tripods use some humans as slaves. Some work in mines collecting precious metals that the tripods need for some reason. Others are slaves in the cities that they live in across the sea. And he said some are even hunted by the tripods. So Ozymandias tells him, if you're going to go, wait a week or two after I leave town. That way nobody links the two of us. He asks Will, do you know anybody else your age of like mind that might want to go too? But Will says that he doesn't know. So with that, Ozymandias is on his way out of town. So Will, uses the next week or so to kind of collect supplies, stash food for him to bring along. And he says, he's sad he's going to have to leave his family. He loves his family, of course, but that he just can't stay any more than a sheep can stay once he knows about the slaughterhouse. Now, Will ends up waiting a little longer than 2 weeks for a couple of reasons. One is he's kind of waiting for a full moon. He decides he wants to travel at night as to avoid being seen and possibly return for a capping. But then also, unexpectedly, Henry's mother dies, and Henry comes to live with them. So Will is like, great. He ends up sharing a room with him, and he's just very unhappy because not only does he just not like Henry, this is he's kind of going to have to try to figure out how to now sneak out of the place when time comes. But he's still determined to go. He's just going to have to be very careful and not wake Henry when he goes. So the night comes for Will to leave. And he waits until he's pretty sure everyone in the house is asleep, including Henry, who's sleeping in his own bed in the same room. He thinks it's safe. He sneaks out of the room. He goes to wherever he was hiding all his supplies that he was gathering behind a stone or something in the side of the house. So he goes and he gets all his stuff. Then he sneaks out of the house, down the road, and he gets to the edge of the village. And he's like, okay, I'm totally safe now. I'm gonna, he was just walking around holding his stuff. He's like, I can change into my other clothes and organize my stuff a little better here. He starts putting the food and stuff in his backpack. And he's doing that kind of on the side of the road. And all of a sudden, he hears someone call his name. And of course, it's Henry. Ruined everything. Will is pissed. And he shoves Henry and they start kind of fighting and they're shoving each other, and Henry's he's like, I know you're running away and I want to run away too. And he's like, let me come. And Will's like, ugh. But he knows if he says no, Henry's just gonna go back to the house and tell everybody that Will ran away, and then everything will be totally ruined. So he agrees to let Henry come, thinking he'll ditch him sometime before the sea. They have to catch a boat across sea. So he's thinking, okay, I'll just, let him come with me for a few days and then ditch him before we hop on the boat. Henry doesn't know anything about the map or the directions or anything like that. He doesn't even know why Will's running away. He just knows he's running away. And he wants to run away too because his mother died and he just feels like there's nothing there for him in their village. So the boys are walking along. It's nighttime. They've come to the next village. They're walking through some farmland. And all of a sudden, Henry goes, do you hear that? And they listen, and it's footsteps. And they're like, great, we've already been discovered. They've sent a search party after us, and great. So they start running, and it's nighttime. You can't see anything. Will trips on a rock and twists his ankle. And so they're freaking out because the search party's coming. Search party's coming. They're gonna get in trouble. They're getting closer and closer, and it's dark. They can't see anything. And all of a sudden, they realize it's a bunch of sheep. Will's pissed because he just twisted his ankle over what Henry said, and it turned out to be some freaking sheep. Will is, cussing out Henry, saying, I didn't even want you to come. Now you've ruined everything. Henry's just like, well, we're gonna have to find you a place to lay up for a little bit. So they see like a little hut off in the distance, and they decide to, go hang out there for a few days while Will heals. It starts to rain. Great. Will goes to get up and he can't walk. His ankle just hurts too bad. They don't think it's broken, they just think it's sprained. Henry decides to put Will over his shoulder and take him to the hut. Noise! So the boys find this hut and they decide to lay up there for a few days. And it's raining, so they just fall into some hay and go to sleep with Will's ankle throbbing. The next morning, Will wakes up and Henry's gone. And so is the backpack. And he's like, great. He ditched me and he took all the food and supplies. Just great. So Will is like freaking out, imagining having to go back home, humiliated, and having to be capped. But then he hears Henry's voice calling. And apparently he had gone to go get some food. And he had taken the pack for something to carry the food in. So Will felt kind of bad about that, about assuming bad motives on Henry, but not so bad because he did still blame him for the situation they were in. So being laid up there for a few days, they had some time to talk. And it turns out that Henry wanted to run away as a way to avoid being capped. So now Will realizes that Henry and him are kind of like mind. Feeling bad about having assumed Henry ditched him like he was going to do, he decides to tell Henry everything. He tells him about Ozymandias. He tells him about the White Mountains and the map. It's fucking noise! They continue on their way when Will is feeling better. And they get to the village on the edge of the sea. And Ozymandias had told Will, he told him to look for a ship called the Orion, and that the captain of this ship's name was Captain Curtis. Now, Captain Curtis is one of them. He helps take potential White Mountain citizens across the sea. So they get there, and they're looking for the Orion. They're not finding it in the port. So they figure, well, she must be out to sea then. Let's just chill here for a few days and wait for it to come back in. They're hungry. They see a sign outside of a tavern that says, meat pies, 6 pence. Now, Will apparently had brought some money along that he had been saving for some time, and he brought it with him. So he tells Henry, wait out here, I'll go in and get us some meat pies. So he goes in and he pays, and right as he's going to walk out, a large hand comes down on his shoulder. It's this kind of muscly guy. He asks Will, would you be missed if, by your parents if you didn't show up shortly? And Will's like, yeah, my parents are like right down this, they're just a few blocks over. But this guy kind of seems like he's like a pirate or something. He's like, not with that accent, they aren't. So he recognizes that Will is not from these parts. And he probably figures some kind of runaway. Oops. He basically is like, well, that's not true. you'll make a fine worker for my ship. So he's basically going to force Will. He's like going to make him a slave, basically, on his ship. And he's starting to drag Will out of the tavern. And Will, kind of just in a panic, yells out, "Captain Curtis!" And a big man stands up. And he says, "That's my boy. You let him go." And the guy does. So apparently this Captain Curtis guy has a bit of a reputation, and you better listen to him. If he says that's his boy, it's his boy. So Captain Curtis takes Will and Henry to his ship, and he locks them in his cabin. And he says, the other people on the ship are capped. So for their safety, he's keeping them in his private quarters on the ship. And he brings them food and, the things that they need. So they're on this ship for a few days. And one of the days, they suddenly hear this high-pitched, siren sound almost. And they look out the window and they see 6 tripods floating on the surface of the water. They have these little, almost propellers or something under their feet. I imagine some kind of, do you know the little bumper boat things? How it's like an inner tube, but it has a propeller or something moving around. Yeah, I envision something like that on the bottom of each one of their feet. And it's kind of just hovering over the ocean. So they're doing this. There's 6 of them, and they're got this high-pitched sound, and they're coming closer and closer to the ship. And this is freaking the boys out because they get too close, they're gonna capsize them. And they're getting closer and closer, and then all of a sudden the lead one makes a sharp turn in front of the Orion, causing a big wake, and it tosses their ship all around. It's very nerve-wracking. They're really scared that the boat is gonna capsize. And all these 6 tripods keep doing this over and over. It seems like they're kind of toying or playing with the boat. Luckily, they don't capsize, and the tripods lose interest or something, and they just move on. Captain Curtis comes back into the room to check on the boys, and he's like, "Yeah, that's not really an uncommon experience. They sometimes actually take out ships, and they don't know why they do it, but it's just something they do." And the boys are like, "That was a horrible sound." He's like, "We've never heard them make that sound before." And Captain Curtis is like, "Oh, they make a lot of different calls." Now in this area, the tripods are a lot more frequent. The people are more used to them. They see them. They're more acquainted with them. Whereas where Will is from, they only see him on cappings. And this is because they're getting closer and closer to the tripod's city. They make it to the port they're going to. And Captain Curtis takes them ashore in a dinghy at night. And he gives them supplies. And he tells them that it's going to be very dangerous from here on out. It's going to be very dangerous from here on out because they don't speak the language there. And if they get caught, the people in this land will capture them and take them to be capped. Now, while that is upsetting enough, if they are capped in this land, the capping almost all the time don't take, and the people end up becoming vagrants. And they think it's because of the language, something about, they assume that they speak the language of that land, so the cap communicates in that language. But the boys don't speak that language. So, that would drive you insane, right? Constantly hearing a voice in your head that speaks a language you don't understand. That'd be terrible. So they hurry along and they decide to travel not on the main roads, but they got to get through the village first. So the boys are walking through the village. All of a sudden, a door to a tavern comes swinging open, and a bunch of like drunk men come out, and they grab the boys and they drag them back inside. And they're yelling and screaming in this language that the boys don't understand. So they don't know what's going on. The men they bring them into the tavern and sit them down, surround them. The boys don't know what's going on. The men are arguing back and forth. It seems like there are lots of hand movements and angry faces. It seems like the boys, they're trying to figure out what to do with these boys for some reason. They assume to figure out how to get them, capped. So while the men are arguing, Will notices on a staircase there's a boy about their age. And he's very slim, and he's very odd looking. He describes this weird contraption that's on his face, that it's glass, and there's a wire that goes back behind his ears. Okay? So this weird contraption is obviously glasses. Will notices this boy up there watching everything that's going on. The men finally decide to take the boys and they lock them in some sort of storage room. They can hear the men arguing still, and the arguing starts to subside, and they can tell people are leaving, and they try to find a way out, but why would they lock them in a place you could get out of? They can't find a way out. Okay, so these are filled, and I just need to file them and then do the design work. But we are going to save that for another video. We're also going to save the rest of this story for another video. If you liked this one, give it a thumbs up and let me know. Make sure and subscribe and hit the notifications bell so that you know when I upload new videos, because you don't want to miss them, right? You don't want to miss what happens to Will and Henry and the tripods. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.